you think next year, because again, I'm having a hard time seeing anyone in the West, especially in the White House, willing to compromise or respect any sort of interest that Russia or anyone else might have. So going into next year, do you think that maybe they'll try again to go China over Taiwan, or maybe even activate Greece to go Turkey, especially because we have elections in Turkey next year? We've already had one terrorist attack, and people remember that the Turks didn't want to accept the American ambassador's condolences, which says something about what they think, who was involved. So do you think that maybe Turkey or Taiwan could be a flashpoint next year, also to kind of widen this global front that I think the globalists in the White House are obviously opening against everyone they can?
No, I mean, the potential is always there. But let's take Taiwan, for instance. They just had their version of midterm elections. They were supposed to be local elections for mayors and city councils and things of that nature. And normally, when you carry out elections of that kind, national security policy isn't on the ballot. People were talking about potholes and corruption and things of that nature. But the president of Taiwan overplayed her hand. She believed that her party was in a dominant position, so she sought to use this election as a referendum on her cross-straits policy, and that is the very aggressive posture that she had been taking together with the United States. And her goal was to have this tremendous result in the election that would allow her to double down, and in effect call the Chinese bluff on whether or not China was willing to go to war or not. Very dangerous situation. Fortunately for the world and for the Taiwanese people and the Chinese people, the electorate rejected the referendum. The Kuomintang party, the opposition party, actually has had a major victory, won a majority of seats, including, I believe, the mayor of Taipei, so a very politically influential seat. And the political defeat was such that the Chinese president had to resign as the head of the party. She's still the president, but she's not in a position now to pursue aggressively this cross-channel policy that the United States have been pushing her into doing. So I believe that the world has won a 2-year respite. She comes up for re-election in 2024, and I don't think that Taiwan's going to be in a position to push aggressive cross-channel, cross-strait policies for the next 2 years. So I think we dodged a bullet there. And that's a good thing. I really do think it's a good thing. On Turkey, Greece, Erdogan has the Turkish president has an election coming up, I think June of next year, the president election. And so he has been, he's sort of in a weak position domestically at home. His economy isn't doing well. There's a lot of people starting to criticize his foreign policy as being destructive towards Turkey. And he's just been there a long time. And so there's a lot of, resentment building up. Even the best politicians get people mad at them. And if you've been a politician for any length of time, you've accumulated a lot of enemies. And so Erdogan's in a relatively weak position, which meant that, generally speaking, when you're weak domestically, you push foreign policy, you push national security policy. And we saw Erdogan do that both in Syria and Iraq. I mean, there's a forgotten conflict in Iraq where Turkish soldiers and the Air Force are fighting on a daily basis. The PKK, the Turkish Kurdish group that's operating out of northern Iraq. And then there's the ongoing Turkish occupation of northern Syria that Erdogan has threatened to expand, create an even wider buffer to serve as a barrier for Kurds to be able to come into Turkey and carry out incidents such as what occurred in Istanbul, where a female Kurd who was linked to a political party or political organization that has been promoted and supported by the United States carried out an attack. That's why the Turks wouldn't accept the condolences from the Americans. They blame the Americans for this. And then another one has been the escalation of tension between Turkey and Greece. And for a while there, it looked like Turkey was getting ready to go to war with Greece over the Aegean Islands, right off the coast of Turkey. That Turkey was accusing Greece of arming in violation of post-World War I treaty. There's wrestling going over, wrangling going over, water, territorial water disputes because of the potential for gas and oil exploration, underwater oil exploration. So the tensions were very high, but Vladimir Putin, the Russian president's one of the most savvy geopolitical players out there. And I think he understands that, first of all, the importance of Turkey to Russia's regional posture. Turkey's a NATO nation, but Turkey's not behaving like a NATO nation. Turkey's behaving in an independent fashion, some of which is to the benefit of Russia, some which is not to the benefit of Russia. But Russia's been mature politically managing this issue. The last thing Russia needed was Turkey to go into a conflict with Greece. It would be destabilizing for Russia. It would bring uncertainty, a lack of predictability, all the things that the current relationship with Turkey provide. So what did Putin do? He said, I'm going to make you a regional energy hub. I'm going to double down on Turkstream, give you another pipeline, and then I'm going to support you becoming a regional energy hub, which means not just Russian energy, but Putin's going to allow, without interference, Azerbaijani gas coming in, other potential gas, so that Turkey can become a place that sets the price of gas. And that's very important economically for Turkey. And what this does is this is now the leading card that Erdogan's going to play in his election. And so Erdogan's going to say, no, because of me and Vlad, Turkey's going to be an energy hub, and this is going to transform the Turkish economy. Everything's going to be good. And it emphasizes the economic and de-emphasizes the military. So I think Turkey is also going to be sort of taken off the map off the war map. And so, the United States is running out of options in terms of creating distractions. I think we'll continue to, I used this term before, but I'll use it again, double down on stupid, a gambling reference. We lost all the bets, double it, in the hope that somehow that the outcome will be different. So we'll continue to double down on sanctions. And I do think that we're going to be seeing the economy start to factor in more, because the military aspect of the Ukraine conflict is over. I mean, there's a lot of buying left to do, but really there's nothing more that NATO and the United States can do with the current constraints, which is no direct conflict between NATO and Russia over Ukraine. I think this military in 2023, we're going to see a military campaign that will reach its climax by the end of spring, early summer, and be wrapped up by the end of summer. But that doesn't mean that the conflict is over. All the Russian politicians have come out and said there won't be a second mobilization. There's not going to be a second mobilization. This is it. This is the resources. Okay, I respect that. But it also means that you are self-limiting, because this takes, I believe, a major incursion into Western Ukraine off the table. This takes a major assault on Kiev off the table. This creates the ability for Russia to take Kharkiv, to take Odessa, to link up with Transnistria, and to secure, Kherson and Zaporizhia by occupying Nikolaev, and maybe even Dnipropetrovsk, maybe Sumy. Who knows? These might become buffer zones. But beyond that, you've just literally ate up all the military resources Russia has. So I think that it has committed to this fight. I think the Russians will destroy the Ukrainian army, but the next phase is going to be a economic, political phase of the conflict, where Russia is going to continue to destroy the Ukrainian infrastructure, and pressure the Ukrainians to get a dictated peace. Zelensky, I believe, will be removed. next year. He's not going to see out the 2023 year. Whoever replaces him will be there only to negotiate a surrender. And then the question is, can Russia impose its political will on Ukraine? And I believe this might take the winter. As bad as this winter is, next winter is going to be far worse for Europe and Ukraine. Right now, we're looking at a tragedy. Next year, we'll be looking at a disaster. And from that disaster will come, I believe, the shaping of a new reality in Europe and in Ukraine that is acceptable of a negotiated peace on terms dictated by Russia. And I think the United States is going to be focused on managing that, an inevitable outcome, and not be distracted by trying to create other conflicts around the world. I mean, because, we didn't mention Iran. I mean, that's the easy one. That's low-hanging fruit. But the problem with Iran is, as the United States is seeking to delicately balance, energy security issues regarding keeping the European economy alive, if you attack Iran, all that oil in the region is taken off the map. And the prices will go through the roof, and the American economy will collapse. Right now, we're trying to manage the collapse of the European economy. The American economy would collapse, and that's a political disaster for a president who's rolling into the election cycle seeking re-election. Biden's job right now is to mitigate disaster, to minimize the political fallout. So it's important for him that 2023 bring a resolution, because then he will be able to, and at least the Democrats, roll into 2024 with certainty. They can't allow this conflict to extend into the 2024 election cycle, because that's a recipe for political disaster, because all the Republicans have to do is sit back and take cheap shots all day long. They don't even have to work on this one, just cheap shots. But if it's resolved, now the Republicans are going to have to come up with a solution of their own. And so I think that the political realities of the American political cycle is such that Biden can't be looking for additional windmills to tilt. He's not Don Quixote trying to create new adventures. He has to solve this problem, and this problem is one that the solution will only come at a Russian victory. The question is, can you limit the Russian victory to Ukraine? How much of Europe can you hold on to and retain? Because Europe's going through a tough time, and this winter will be telling. But as I said, next winter will be disastrous. There's no more cheap Russian gas to fill up the gas storage. So any gas that you're going to fill up next year, because you're going to probably bring it, especially if a cold wave comes through Europe, bring the gas reserves as close to zero as possible. This year they started with over 50% already there, 50% of cheap gas, and they bought as much cheap gas as they could to get it up to 90, 98, close to 100. Next year, they're going to have to spend all that money on expensive liquid natural gas. They don't have enough money to do it. So the reserves aren't going to get built up, which means next year, the economy is going to collapse at a quicker rate, total devastation. And this is inevitable. You can't change this outcome. That's the important thing. You can't change this outcome. Ukraine is ruined. Everything that's happening to them now is going to roll over into next winter, and Ukraine has no plan B, plan C. The only plan they have is absolute catastrophe. Biden is going to be seeking to mitigate that, manage that. One way to do that, to be honest, if anybody would ever listen to me, if you want to get the Russians and get them bad, let Russia destroy as much of Ukraine as possible, and then bring this conflict to an end where the burden of reconstruction is put on Russia. And now watch Russia dance, because Russia's going to need help, and China probably won't be there to do it all. They're going to need European help. Now you have leverage. Now you have things going on. So we'll see what Biden does. And look, the Russians aren't stupid. They know this too. So I think you're going to see Russia manage this conflict in a very measured way to avoid escalation, but at the same time to make sure that they don't create expectations that can't be met by reality.
Yeah, It's hard to imagine. I can't imagine this administration recognizing a change of borders of Ukraine. I can't imagine that. They may in the end be compelled to support some sort of a, let's say, truce. But for them to recognize Russian territorial gains, I can't see it. I think that would take a whole new administration coming in. But the question is then, on your own home front, is a change in administration possible anymore? Are you going to have regular elections anymore? I mean, are the Democrats going to let anyone else win? That's the question that also looms kind of over your scene.
Yeah, I mean, let's just be clear. America has a lot of room for improvement, especially if we're going to sell ourselves as the foremost democracy in the world, which, to be frank, we no longer deserve that title. We once did, no longer. To re-earn that, we have there's some fundamental issues that have to be overcome that I don't know if they're capable of being overcome in the short term. Do I think we're going to have a 2024 election? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to have an election. Do I think the Democrats can lose that election? 100%. They can lose that election. See, the corruption of the American democratic process doesn't come from somebody trying to pull a Donald Trump and seize and hold on and retain power. That's unconstitutional, and you see the pushback that's done to that. Even people who were supportive of Trump and anti-Biden are very unhappy about what happened on January 6th. No, the way what destroys American democracy is the money that's involved, special interest money, Citizens United, the one of the most the horrific Supreme Court decisions, which gave corporations the status of citizens so they can freely pour money into elections, so that the average American, how can you call it a democracy if the vast majority of the people that might consider running for an office can't because they can't afford to? You've created, we criticize the Iranians and say they put this Islamic, litmus test out there. You have to be, of good standing in the Islamic faith. You have to pass through the Guardian Council. We say, how can that be democratic? Look, they have a screening thing on religion. Okay, fair enough. We have a screening thing on money. If you don't have money, if you're not getting funded, you don't get the back, you don't get to run. So already the vast majority of Americans who could be qualified to run for office can't because they can't afford it. So now who's selecting the candidates? Not the American people, special interests. And we have to fix that, because at the end of the day, what I believe is going to eventually happen is we're going to achieve establishment equilibrium in the parties. Right now, everything's out of whack because of Donald Trump. I mean, say what you want about Donald Trump. You can say all the bad things in the world, and you'll probably be right on most of them. You can say some good things, and you might be right on some of those. He shook up the system. He shook up a system that was in desperate need of being shaken up. I view this as a good thing if it causes the system to be rebuilt in a different image. I don't think that's happening, though. Unfortunately, I see the Republican Party rallying around the Republican establishment to basically reattain the status they had pre-2015 when Donald Trump came down the escalator. We see the Democratic Party, again, rallying around the most unqualified candidate they've ever had in office, Joe Biden. He's the absolute worst. And the alternative for him, constitutionally, seems to be Kamala Harris, who's even worse. But the Democratic Party's rallying around them. Why? Because neither of them have real political power. Joe Biden has no political power. Kamala Harris has even less political power. All they are figureheads. They're figureheads of a Democratic Party-controlled establishment that wants to continue to maintain nominal have nominal control of the White House. They'd like to get control of the Senate and the House of Representatives again, so that they can pursue a Democratic Party agenda. But when we say Democratic Party agenda, it's not the agenda of the American people. It's the agenda of what we call the party, which is an establishment based upon money and power. It's so far removed from the actual needs and wants and desires of the American people that you can't call this a democratic society. So, we come back to the 2024 election. It's not so much about what the American people think about Ukraine. It's important. There's a lot of people that are saying, well, what do the American people think? Frankly speaking, you don't want to ask the American people what they think about Ukraine, because most of them couldn't point it out on a map. I mean, we're throwing out terms here, and I'm assuming that the vast majority of your Serbian population, if I say Zaporizhia, they know exactly what I'm talking about. If I say Odessa, they know exactly what I'm talking about. If I say Transnistria, they'll probably correct me and say, no, it's Transnistria. You're saying it wrong, Ritter, you're an idiot. Yes, I admit, I'm an American, I say everything wrong. But at least I can point to it on a map, just like your Serbian audience can. The vast majority of Americans cannot. They have no clue not only where it is, but why it's important, what's going on. This is why we can support a regime that, from a intellectual and moral standpoint, is unsupportable. A regime that embraces Stepan Bandera and the ideology of, the Banderists. This should be so repulsive to the average human being, not just average American, but average human being. Should just reject out of hand what's going on in terms of, Western Ukrainian nationalism that is dominating the Ukrainian government today and the Ukrainian military. But we can't even comprehend that. This is one of the problems that Serbia had in the whole Bosnia conflict, the breakup of Yugoslavia, was the inability of the American people to comprehend what was going on. What was the historical consequences and context? What we allowed to happen was to be, have our opinions shaped by media that oversimplified everything and created a good versus bad. So the good were the Bosnians, the good were the Croatians later on, but the bad were the Serbs. The Serbs were the evil ones. And that's what the American people were taught. That's what the American people believed. And that allowed the American political process to pursue the policies it did, even though anybody who dug into history went, hey, guys, it's a little bit more complicated. It's not good versus evil, black versus white. There's a lot of complexity going on. And maybe the Serbs have some points here that we might want to listen to, going in, but we didn't do that. Same thing in Ukraine. We've allowed the Ukrainian situation to be oversimplified into Ukraine good, Russia bad, Zelensky good, Putin bad. And this shapes American domestic politics, because when you dumb down the American audience like this, you don't have to worry about coming up with solutions that make sense. You just have to come up with something that you can call a solution. And because the people are so stupid about what really is going on, they can't sit there and say, that doesn't solve anything. This is why we can allow our representatives to write off multi-billion-dollar checks and send them out there. And when Rand Paul, the Republican senator from Kentucky, stands up and says, how about an inspector general to monitor all this and find out? And everybody says no, the American people go, yeah, no inspector general. That's a good idea. No, it's the worst idea possible. But, this is where we're going right now. America is a fundamentally broken country, And we really do need to focus on fixing ourselves before we try and go around and tell the world, how they should operate.
Looking from the outside, it seems like the gap is so wide now between, let's say, the two Americas. Can it ever be reconciled, these two Americas? I mean, can you have one country again like you used to?
Well, fortunately, we have something called the Constitution that still is of legal relevance. We are doing our best to ensure that we disgrace the institution of the American judicial system and court system, so that the Supreme Court, instead of being the highest body on the land when it comes to interpretation of the Constitution becomes a laughing stock. Right now, the Supreme Court is on the cusp of just going totally into laughing stock. And when that happens, then its decisions about the Constitution, it carry no weight because, government only works as long as the governed give consent to be governed. When we lose respect for the government, we lose respect for the rule of law institutions. That's how societies collapse. But we still have a Constitution that has meaning. It's under attack, and from both sides. Anybody comes in and says the following. Let's just pretend that I'm Scott Ritter, and now I'm going to tell you about the Second Amendment and my belief on the Second Amendment. Every American has a God-given right to own guns, and you can't take it away, and there's no compromise, etc. Well, you know what? That's the opinion of one American. It might be a right opinion, it might be a wrong opinion, but it's my opinion. It has no legal weight, none. The only opinion that counts on the Second Amendment is the opinion, opinion of the court system. And if you challenge it, if the government does something that I believe challenges my Second Amendment rights, I then can petition to the courts to hear my claim, and the courts will resolve it and go up. And a decision will be made that may be against me, but it has to be respected. That doesn't mean that I can't continue to push claims, but I have to respect the result, or else our country stands for nothing. And we have a Constitution right now that appears to still have relevance that goes beyond political parties. And as long as that's the case, there's a chance that America can repair itself if we can just return to the norms and values. But remember when I said Americans can't point out Ukraine on a map, therefore we're challenged? Here's the sad truth. I can take any graduating class of American immigrants who are petitioning for American citizenship, any class that's getting ready to sworn in, and I will guarantee you that let's say there's 100 new American citizens. I can go out and sweep 100 people off the streets, all American citizens, natural born, come in and issue a test on the Constitution. The new Americans who weren't born here but had to study the Constitution, pass the test, become citizens, will do well. I will guarantee you that over 90% of the Americans I drag in off the street will fail the test. They don't know the Constitution. They don't know what it is. It's a theory to them. It means nothing. They think they know about select amendments, Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. They think they know something, but they don't. The court system is designed to have, legal minds consider this and draw decisions. We have to respect that. But in order to respect that, we also have to empower ourselves with knowledge and information. And we're failing as citizens. We are failing. The Constitution defines who we are and what we are as a nation. It set forth the very principles of what America is. It is the United States of America. And if we don't understand it, we don't deserve the title American citizen. And yet everybody's running around going, USA, USA, USA. It's a meaningless chant because it stands for nothing. Because the only thing that makes America great is the Constitution. The only thing that makes the Constitution viable is the American people. If the American people have lost touch with the Constitution, don't understand the Constitution, they've lost faith with America. So, yeah, we're headed in the wrong direction. I'm very concerned that we may be in a situation. The second the Constitution loses relevance amongst a significant proportion of American people, it's a recipe for disaster. Because then people can start thinking about unconstitutional means of changing the government. Then it's over. That's revolution. It's done. I don't think we're there yet, but we're heading in that direction. It's a very dangerous thing.
You just mentioned neo-Nazis and Ukraine. And did you think when you were in the Soviet Union back in the late 1980s and arms control inspector, and then Berlin Wall fell and democracy and freedom won, could you imagine that neo-Nazism would actually be kind of rehabilitated in the West? It seems like the Nazi element of Ukraine and the Kiev regime is being totally ignored, underplayed now. Doesn't matter. you know, these guys are our friends. I think some of the guys from the Azov battalion were recently on a visit to the United States. I mean, yep. How can this be? Why is Nazism all of a sudden a good thing?
You know, the interesting thing is in the late 1980s, with perestroika and glasnost, a window was opened on Soviet society that, you know, for people like myself who were interested in it, we got to see things that otherwise we wouldn't have been exposed to. And there were several you know, journalists who had spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union started writing books that would sought to explain the new Russia, the new Soviet Union. And in there were some just interesting things about weightlifting groups in the Lubertsky suburb of Moscow, who would have swastikas and stuff. And it was, look, in Russia, in the Soviet Union, there's a resurgence of neo-Nazi, you know, type ideology amongst the skinhead youth and everything. And I was focused on that, saying, how could that be? Because, you know, I travel around the Soviet Union, I see these memorials to the heroes who fought Nazi Germany, and I see how strong that sentiment resonates. And how could this be happening in Russia, in the Soviet Union of all places? Western Ukraine didn't even register on my map, and that's probably due to my ignorance. I mean, I knew all about the organization Ukrainian Nationalism. I knew about Bandera, but I believed that Bandera had been stomped out in the 1950s, that the CIA backed him up, but that the Soviets had stomped them out, that there had been this rehabilitation campaign, and that by and large, Western Ukraine was absorbed into the Soviet Union. And I never thought that there's a seething, you know, seed of, you know, I don't know if seeds can seethe, so my analogies are getting mixed up, but this angst that was in Western Ukraine, that was based on this hateful ideology, that it was there in existence in the hearts, and they were actively promoting it. It wasn't just outsiders, you know, the diaspora in Canada and the United States and elsewhere promoting it. It was there, you know, manifested inside Western Ukraine. That blew my mind when this happened in 2014, when it happened. I'm like, how did this happen? How did this happen so quickly? I followed, you know, the skinhead movement in Germany after unification, you know, and what I saw is that a lot of times these skinhead neo-Nazi, they're not really Nazi movements. They're discontented citizens who are looking for anything that finds a radical departure from the norm. So that's how Lubertsky became. It wasn't that Adolf Hitler was really being reborn in Moscow. It's that the economic reality of the Soviet Union in the late perestroika period was such that there was a lot of discontented people. So there's a difference between that and what was happening in Germany and what we saw happen in Ukraine. Ukraine was real. It was genuine. It was in the blood. It was in the DNA. I never thought I would see this again. You know, when Serbia, when Yugoslavia collapsed, you know, the ugly history of the Balkans during World War II, during the Nazi occupation, came out. And there was a lot of talk about Croatia and the Ustasi and things of that nature. And that got swept under the rug because, of course, Croatians were good and the Serbians were bad. So we had to ignore that aspect of it. But there was, it did prompt me to start asking questions of, wait a minute, how could this be alive today? And then if it is alive, why are we supporting it? So what I saw there with what was going on with Croatia, and I know there's going to be Croatians who hate my guts right now, and I'm not condemning all Croatians. I'm not throwing a blanket accusation out there. I'm just saying that you can't deny reality. And there was a problem with Croatia, with ultranationalism that had a strong neo-Nazi affiliation to it. That was swept under the rug by the West because we needed to support them. But I see that as sort of a precursor now for what's going on in Ukraine, where we're going to ignore the ugly reality of of this neo-Nazi political movement, which makes what happened in Croatia pale in comparison. I mean, the Ukrainians are far worse. And I know if you again, there's going to be Serbs out there saying, Scott, no, the Croatians were pretty darn bad. And I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that from my perspective, this is huge what's happening in Ukraine. And but what the West has already shown its ability to turn a blind eye to the resurrection of this kind of ideology, an ideology that should have been defeated, totally defeated in the aftermath of the Second World War, but wasn't. I do think that's a fair question for historians to be asking at some point in time. Why didn't we defeat the odious ideology of Nazi Germany? Why does it continue to reside in the hearts of certain population groups in Europe? It's a good question.
Okay, Scott, how do you see next year, 2023? Is there any reason for optimism? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or is it just going to get worse everywhere in the world?
2023 is going to be a hard year, but I view it as a year in transition. The question is it going to be transitioning toward a better place or a worse place? This is a tough stance for an American to take because it runs against the grain of the policies of my government. But the only hope the world has, I believe, is for a decisive Russian victory in Ukraine. It's the only hope. Anything less than a decisive Russian victory creates the potential for expansion of the conflict, continuation of the conflict, and further global destabilization. The sanctions regime, the global economy cannot function properly so long as the sanction regime against Russia is in place. But the only way the sanction regime against Russia is going to go away is if there's conflict termination. And the only way there will be conflict termination is if Russia wins. Anything less than Russia dictating the terms of conflict resolution to Ukraine and the West will leave us with a perpetual war, a war of attrition that will eat away at Russia, eat away at Europe, and be devastating for everybody, and create the real potential for expanded conflict, whether it be in Transnistria, Western Ukraine, or Serbia, or Syria, or elsewhere. So if you're not rooting for a Russian victory, you're rooting for global disaster. I just have to say that. The sad thing is a Russian victory is going to come at horrific cost to everybody involved. It's going to cost Russia a lot of lives. It's going to cost Ukraine even more lives. It's going to cost Europe its economy, its economic health. It could lead to the potential collapse of the European Union. I know the Serbians don't want to hear that because you guys are working really hard to become part of the European Union, but I think you're betting on a losing horse. You might be better off finding another way out of your economic difficulties other than the European Union, because I don't see it surviving. The European Union needs a healthy German economy, and the German economy is going into tanks. And 1 in 4, industrial jobs is going to flee. That number could go up. German companies are shutting down. Energy prices aren't going to be controlled anytime soon. The same thing with the French economy. The Italian economy is struggling. You take away those 3 economies, and what do you have left in Europe? Not much. So, I don't see good things for the European Union if this conflict drags on. The best thing for Europe is for Russia to win this thing so decisively that there never is a question of Ukraine joining NATO or Ukraine being stripped away from the Russian sphere of influence. Ukraine becomes a non-player in the European geopolitical matrix. And a Russian victory also opens the door for hopefully Europe not to double down. I keep using this term, but double down on stupid. What that means is double down on NATO. NATO is being exposed as a fundamentally flawed organization with no real justification for its continued existence, let alone its expansion. We hear now in France, you hear Emmanuel Macron talk about the need for a new European security framework that respects Russia's legitimate national security interests and which starts to wean Europe off of its addiction to American military strength. A Europe that's not capable of standing on its own in terms of national security is a fundamentally weak Europe, one that will always be held hostage to the whim of their American masters. And so, the longer this conflict goes on, the weaker Europe gets, the less likely Europe will be able to stand on its own 2 feet. The sooner this conflict is resolved, the better opportunity is for Europe to redefine itself as a regional, economic and military source of power, capable of sitting down with the Russians and coming up with a European security framework that respects the legitimate national security, requirements of both. This isn't going to happen in 2023. 2023 is purely about a Russian victory or the lack thereof. 2024, I think, is going to be the year of decisiveness. That's the year where major political change can take place. Unfortunately, that means that there's going to be a huge amount of fighting in 2023 in Ukraine, and there's going to be continued economic devastation in Europe. This is what I see happening. This is a problem that Europe brought on itself. This was a problem that didn't need to happen. Imagine what would have happened if Germany had been had negotiated good faith about Minsk, that actually put pressure on Ukraine to accept Minsk, where we would be today. Imagine how strong the European economy would be. Imagine how stable the world economy and world energy security issues would be. Imagine how, relevant the United States would be. I mean, I don't know any European right now outside of the political elite who are addicted to America, people who actually respect my country anymore. I mean, this is a sad state of affairs. When I was a child growing up in Europe in the late 1970s, early 1980s, I took my passport and I bought a Eurail pass and I went all over Europe. And everywhere I went, people were friendly. People respected that passport. They respected the country that I belonged to. I mean, I, as an individual, had to earn their respect. You didn't automatically get it, but you had the benefit of the doubt. When you walked in as an American, people were like, oh, America, we think good thoughts. Therefore, we will give you the benefit of the doubt and think good thoughts about you. Today, when you travel, that passport, it gets the exact opposite result. People look at that and they say, oh, an American. And they think, there's bad thoughts about the government. This isn't a good position to be in for anybody. And it's amazing how quickly we lost the trust and confidence of the world. Hopefully someday we'll be able to get it back, re-earn the trust. But America could have retained some of its influence had it not pursued this policy in Ukraine, if it's not pursued this Russophobic policy. Again, I don't want to oversimplify things, but all the Russians ever asked for was to be treated with respect. That's it. That's all the Russians ever wanted, was to be treated with respect. Had we done that, showed them a modicum of respect, we could still have had policies that were in opposition to them. I think the Russians are mature. They understand that people might be politically opposed to a course of action. But if you treat them with respect, they will sit down, they will talk with you, and they will have a common sense approach to, preventing conflict or conflict resolution. But you have to treat them with respect. And we don't. We don't treat anybody with respect anymore. We demand everybody treat us with respect, but it's not reciprocated. And this is going to be a problem, which means that the United States is going to have to redefine its relationship with the world. And I think 2023 is going to be very key in that. We're going to be seeing things such as the continued de-emphasis or devaluation or lack of prominence of the petrodollar as the world seeks alternative currencies to pay for energy abroad. You're going to see the rise of BRICS, maybe the development of a viable currency basket that can rival the dollar in terms of buying energy, in terms of the global currency reserves. So this is going to be uncomfortable for America. We're going to have to make adjustments at home and abroad. And I think 2023 is going to be a year where America is adjusting to this new reality. Now, the question is which direction we choose to go. Do we choose to be responsible and to seek to get the best possible outcome with the least amount of angst, violence, and catastrophe? Or are we going to pretend that we still are the global superpower and flex our atrophying muscles and create even more catastrophe? That's the question I don't have the answer to. 2024 will be key because that's a president's election. And how will the American establishment position itself going forward? A lot of that's going to be determined by 2023, which means the following. The most important man on the planet is Vladimir Putin. Now, he's not a dictator. He's not an absolute ruler, but he is the chief executive of the only nation that counts when it comes to 2023. What is Russia going to do next year? Is Russia going to seek decisive victory? Or is Russia going to search out compromise? That's the thing, because again, I believe personally that any compromise weakens Russia, emboldens others, which means that instead of a year in transition, 2023 only furthers the angst and the fighting and makes 2024 become a year in transition or beyond. The onus is on Russia to win this thing and win this thing decisively. Is the Russian nation up to it? Is the Russian leadership up to it? Is the Russian military up to it? Are the Russian people up to it? Only they can answer that question.
Wow, I'm tempted to utter a sentence that will sound like these neocons. We're going to hold Russia accountable. Meaning it's up to Russia to make things better. So you better win the war for the good of the world, pretty much.
Sadly, and you know what? And that's an unfair position to put Russia in because they didn't want this. They didn't ask for this. This wasn't their problem. I mean, of course, it's their problem, but they were seeking alternatives. It was Putin that sat down in 2014 and agreed with Merkel to a diplomatic solution at a time when he had the military resolution in his hands. His military was in a position to defeat the Ukrainian military, to embarrass them, to resolve the Donbass issue. And Putin today admits it was a mistake. He said that was a mistake. I should not have believed them. I should not have trusted them. Should have won this thing when I could. So they're not going to make that mistake again. But saying you're going to win and winning are two totally different things. And, you know, as much as Russia's paid a price, and they've paid a price, let's not pretend they haven't. There's a heavier price yet to be paid to achieve the victory that's going to be necessary to get the outcome that not only Russia needs for peace and prosperity, but that Europe needs, that America needs, that the world needs. Here's my pro hint to anybody out there listening. If you're not backing Russia in this fight, you're backing your failure, because a Russian defeat will be a failure for the entire world.
Yeah, that's a good note to end on. Well, I want to thank you first for saying what you said about the EU, because many more Serbs than you think agree with you about its future. So thanks for that as well. I agree with you as well. It's the politicians that have their own visions about the EU, but that's a whole separate story. But anyway, thanks very much for sharing your very insightful thoughts and for being just so open and direct about your opinions. Really appreciate it. Like I said, you are very well watched and liked in Serbia, and I think after this interview, it'll be even more so. And probably people will ask, well, when are you going to invite Ritter again to talk to you? So, just maybe expect an invitation sometime in the near future.
I would gladly accept it, and maybe, who knows, maybe one day I'll be able to sit in your studio and do the interview.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great. Okay.
We'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, but the Russians have to win first.
Yeah, we unfortunately, I mean, again, I always hesitate to say that, but it's the truth. I can't find a nonviolent end to this conflict.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, I rack my brains, but any negotiated settlement will leave Russia in a position that it doesn't want to be in. It'll make NATO and the West feel that they can achieve a victory over Russia. I think Russia has to take the notion of a Russian defeat off the table. The only way to do that by winning. But thanks for talking to me. I wish you a very Merry Christmas. I know the Orthodox Christmas is in January, but I also wish you a Happy New Year, and I wish you the best. And let's hope that next year brings the best possible resolution for everybody involved.
Merry Christmas to you and your family, and a very Happy New Year. And I hope your hopes really come to fruition. I hope we do see a decisive victory of Russia next year as a kind of a prelude to a more lasting peace. Let's hope for that.
Yep.